be the easiest because of my relationship with President Putin, which had always been a good one. I thought that was going to be the easiest one. But, you know, in war, you never know what's going to happen.
He obviously had the bit between his teeth, because after that is then the meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine, telling him that he could take back the whole of Ukraine that had been lost really since 2014. I mean, this includes all areas of the Donbass, the Crimea, and I think went further and said you could keep going. So what has created that turnaround? Who knows? I think maybe he has realized that he can't bribe Putin into some sort of peace deal that he doesn't want. If he really wants that Nobel Peace Prize, actually, it's the war in Ukraine, that if he stopped that, then there'd be very few dissenters as such. So maybe that is galvanizing him. Maybe he's also been sort of briefed on what is happening in Ukraine. He calls Russia a paper tiger, which is an interesting description. Paper tiger is actually it comes from a Chinese word, really saying somebody who is completely ineffective and not up to a challenge. Maybe that is what his speechwriters and intelligence people are telling him that Putin really is. And if you look at the facts on the ground, you could come to that conclusion. Putin's army has pretty much culminated. In other words, it's sort of run out of steam. The Ukrainians are now themselves making some headroads and getting land back, particularly in Petrovsk, where Russia has lost thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers trying to take it. And also only last week, the UK MOD intelligence update said that if Putin took the whole of the Donbass, which he has said he wants, it would take him 4 years and another 2 million casualties. So there is that too, that actually the Russian military is not really up to it. And the other element that's been important in the last 7 days have been the incursions into what is in effect NATO airspace. Firstly, we saw the 19 to 20 drones hitting Poland and were shot down by NATO jets. We then saw drones in Romania, which were not shot down. And most recently, 4 MiG-31 Russian jets flying in Estonian airspace. And it is clear, I think, to most of us who have been watching this, that this is Putin testing NATO, seeing how far he can go. And in the last few days, both Estonia and a lot of NATO countries have said, the next Russian jet that comes over will be shot down. And I think there seems to be a confidence in Europe, and perhaps with Putin, that actually NATO can shoot down these Russian jets and things aren't going to change. So there seem to be a number of things that are happening at the moment, not least that Trump knows that the only sure way to get the Nobel Peace Prize is to create peace in Ukraine. But actually, European NATO countries have realized that they can flex their military muscles, and with a Russian army, in retreat in some areas and unlikely to advance, this is perhaps the moment to enable Ukraine to get a just peace deal for itself. And what we've discussed in the past and what we're seeing is how very successful deep operations by Ukraine Secret Service and Special Forces are having an impact in Russia. And it would appear about 20% of the Russian oil industry has been severely damaged by these deep strikes, particularly their ability to produce petrol and fuel for commercial cars. Across Russia now, fuel is in very short supply for cars, even in places like St. Petersburg, that where the rich and the privileged live. If you can get fuel, you're queuing a hell of a long time for it, and it's costing you a lot of money. That is having a real impact. So what America could do, and what the West could do, is could it enable more of this from Ukraine? And I'm thinking very much of Western technology, precision-guided long-range missiles. At the moment, it would appear most of the Ukrainian attacks are from domestically produced drones and missiles, sort of not homemade, but knocked up in Ukraine, and they are having a huge impact. So we could enable them to do a lot more than that. And this is bringing the war home to the rank and file in Russia, who have sort of been, we've always been surprised that the Russian people aren't making more of this but now that they can't get fuel for their cars, now their flights are disrupted so often by Ukrainian drones flying around Moscow and St. Petersburg, they can't even get away to anywhere in the world that will allow them to go, and not to beach resorts, in the Black Sea sort of thing. So it is beginning to have a real impact. So that is a way to enable them. The other way is I've been calling for a no-fly zone on Western Ukraine for some time now. What that would do is prevent Russian drones and missiles attacking civilian targets in places like Kyiv and Lviv and elsewhere. Now, that would have a huge psychological impact in the positive for Ukrainian people and the negative for Russian if they keep seeing all their drones shot down. And the West can do this. The amount of F-35 stealth fighter jets that European NATO countries have, and actually a lot of them, even British Typhoon jets, have recently been moved to support Poland, that actually they could do this without even going into Ukrainian airspace. So I think that would make a difference. And if Western air defense assets are protecting Ukrainian cities, then more of Ukrainian military can move on the offensive to the front line. So I think, what we've seen, particularly around Petros, is that actually, given the right support, Ukraine can make areas. And also the other thing that's been pretty apparent in the last week or so, that Ukraine has been destroying a lot of air defense assets of the Russians in Crimea, which would enable them potentially to retake Crimea, and other indications that they're slightly on the front foot. But it will require Trump to back up his strong words yesterday with actual deeds to allow them to move forward. It seems that European NATO countries, especially the Baltic states, are very much on the front foot here. And all this sort of shift eastwards by NATO might well be enough for Putin to realize that actually, if he doesn't sue for peace now, he could start going backwards pretty rapidly. I mean, there are an awful lot of ifs here, but things are slightly more positive this week. President Trump has said he will allow European countries to buy American military hardware to give to Ukraine. And that's the key thing. There seems to be enough money in Europe to do this. But it means the Americans making sure there are enough, long-range missiles, HIMARS, ATACMS, etc., and cruise missiles that are available to Ukraine. And I think those are the sort of assets that they really need. Of course, it would appear that ammunition is coming through in sufficient numbers now, but it's really the high-tech Western capability, predominantly US, that will make a difference here, which Trump has the ability to turn the taps on, which perhaps have been turned off a little bit. So that is key. But I think also European NATO countries must consider supporting Ukraine more, even with sort of boots on the ground or even in the air. Yeah, not necessarily directly in the offensive supporting Ukraine, but really allowing protecting areas that Ukraine military is at the moment, and allowing Ukraine military to go on the offensive rather than just the defensive. If all these things come together, and I suppose also if Trump follows through with his threat of sanctions that he's talked a heck of a lot about, but really hasn't done much, then this sort of death by 1,000 cuts, as it were, may well be enough to change Putin's mind, or certainly change the mind of the Russian people, who, although they haven't had a great say in what's happening, I expect increasingly the anger against the Kremlin will develop, and all these things coming together may well be enough, as I said, to get a just peace for Ukraine that he seemed pretty far off until the last couple of days and weeks. Well, I think this is the issue that we're all grappling with. Russian dictators who fail, don't often live long enough to collect their pension, and I expect Putin is very well aware of that. And because he's been so demonstrative in the fact that he is going to subjugate Ukraine and redraw the old Soviet Union boundaries, if he sues for peace now, he is well short of that. And he might see that as being his demise. Yeah. Having said that, if President Trump can persuade Putin that this is his only option, then maybe there is a chance there. But if we do get a peace deal soon, I don't expect President Putin will be president of the Russian Federation for a great deal longer.